It sounds a bit pretentious, but I don't remember a time when I wasn't making stuff. My earliest memories of anything are making collage, and I think most children do. I think it's a really instinctive thing for children to be drawn to because it's a quick way of making images. But I just remember being probably 4 or 5 and cutting up old copies of my mum's K's catalogue and rearranging the models and creating my own sort of worlds and narratives. And I'm essentially doing the same thing, 40 odd years later. With anything visual, we become self-conscious that it doesn't look like the thing it's meant to. And so people stop. But I just didn't stop. I just carried on, and no one told me to stop, so I didn't. I work in mixed media and collage. So I start with photography and things that I draw, things that I find, things that I steal off the internet. And I combine all of these sort of disparate, separate elements to create an overall effect. So it's a really old-fashioned process, really. I embrace digital photography and digital printing because it's cheap, quick and easy. But everything else is done by hand. So I cut everything out individually with a scalpel, and I use coloured paper. I like anything shiny, so I use glitter and sequins and sometimes broken glass. And I've even used things like the plastic flowers and syringes. And I like to combine sort of what are seemingly quite disparate things and come from different worlds. So I like the idea of combining sexual imagery with secular imagery and spiritual imagery. I think collage makes a really profound statement about who we are as people. I think we're all essentially a walking collage. We're all, there's that notion that we're all a portion of everything we've ever loved and everything we've ever been influenced by or seen, or even things that are innate. I go to exhibitions all the time and look at painting, just purely paintings, and I think to myself, I'm going to go back to the studio and I'm just going to make a painting, and it never happens. Within 10 minutes I've reached for glitter or something, and I use a lot of paint, I use a lot of photographs, I use photography, but I'm not really a photographer. I use paint, but I'm not really a painter. I feel like it's all of these things combined that makes them what they are, I guess. The funny thing is, people always really want to touch them, and of course that's not encouraged in a gallery. And I know in the Holly exhibition it's behind perspex. I understand why they've done it, because it's a public space and people will come up and touch it, and then it gets dirty or it gets damaged, and so I get it, and I've exhibited work in public spaces many times over the years, so I totally get why galleries do it. But I feel the same about paintings as well. If you go into a more traditional space, because you get the light reflections on the glass or the perspex, and it does create a barrier between you and the piece. So although you're not really supposed to touch art, if it's without the perspex, it gives you that ability to have another sort of level of interaction with it. I mean, who hasn't been to, the British Museum or whatever and wanted to go and rub the marble arses and things like that? I mean, you just want to, but we can't because we're used to the conventions of of how we behave in a gallery. I like to sort of plunder art history and try and sort of subvert traditions of Western art. So I work a lot in triptych, which was a religious thing, and the idea of the 3 panels of an altar and things like that, and the Father, Son and the Holy Ghost. The number 3 is quite significant in spirituality. But I also sort of steal things from pop culture and even stuff that you see on the street, stuff that's in the news. I used to make work that was more sort of closely framed around the face of a subject or just the body, but in recent years it's sort of been expanding further out, and I create sort of worlds and environments that are a combination of the real world, of photographs that I take of buildings and architecture and places as well as people, and then I combine that with more sort of fantastical elements. The way that saints and the Madonna are also idolised, that's essentially what I'm doing, except with people that I know. It's not necessarily a satire of the religious art or to denigrate it in any way. It's referencing it in a sort of a fond way, I guess. But the difference is that the people are mortal. The people are. I hate this expression as real people and real bodies. It's really rubbish. But it's a shorthand to mean that you don't have to look like a Calvin Klein model to sort of revel in your sexuality or the way you look or the way you express yourself. What I'm trying to show through the work is a level of authenticity. And so I photograph models, mostly people I know, people I meet. Sometimes I approach people, sometimes they approach me. And I try and work with people that are a wide variety in terms of age and size and shape and gender description and all that. I think that's really important. On one level, it's just more interesting for me than photographing people that cookie cutter carbon copies of each other. And secondly, I think it makes a more interesting artistic statement because most people don't look like a Calvin Klein model or a Tom of Finland drawing or whatever. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't feel comfortable in your body and all its lumps and bumps and all the rest of it. I'm very influenced by a lot of sort of queer subcultures and that sort of iconography, and I like combining that sort of secular sexual identity with this idea of ideology and stuff like that. That was a big influence on me, that idea that masculinity was something to be celebrated and not ashamed of, but not a sort of a notion of toxic masculinity. The leather subculture sort of evolved from a kind of a sense of community and like-minded people getting together. And what I tried to take on board from Tom of Finland's work was that all of his figures were often smiling and outdoors and unashamed. And although they're sort of rather fantastical images of masculinity, they're like a sort of, I can't remember who it was, but there was a quote where someone said they're like in the tradition of sort of Michelangelo, that idealized form of the masculine body. Nobody really looks like that, and I've photographed a lot of people with no clothes on, and very few of them look exactly like a Tom of Finland one. Maybe one or two, but it was that idea that they were authentically themselves, they were unashamed, and I think that's a really positive message, a really sex positive message. That what I try to do with mine is, because I work with a diverse array of people, is that you can be anything, you can be any size, shape or whatever, and you can be your authentic self. So my sort of leather journey evolved over many years, and I started when I was a teenager, going to like punk and heavy metal clubs, and those subcultures had traditionally borrowed imagery from sort of queer subculture and biker culture and stuff like that, so that you're 16 or whatever and you go to a metal club, and practically the first things you get are a pair of Doc Marten boots and a biker jacket, and it sort of evolved from there. And a few years after that, I discovered work by artists like Tom of Finland and Robert Mapplethorpe and other sort of fetish-based artists, and was just drawn to it. The first time I saw anything in the real world, it was probably when I was a late teens, early 20s, and started going out in Manchester and going to bars like Company and stuff like that. And I was familiar with that aesthetic from the books, and then all of a sudden you're confronted with the real thing, stood at a bar having a pint of cider. And what that unleashed, it wasn't just a visual thing, it was a sensory thing. So there was the sound and the smell, and all of those elements are very important to sort of, I guess, the eroticization of leather and stuff like that. The creak of the leather, the smell of the leather, the smell of cigar smoke or sweat or what, that you can't portray in a book or an image, can you? You can only experience that when you're in the real world. It probably took me a while to build up the courage to go out dressed like that. I mean, I was dressing like a lunatic from a fairly young age, and go into the crazy house and wet look PVC trousers and chainmail tops and things like that. So I've always had that in me. There's a great quote from Quentin Crisp about artists and the way they dress, and he said that creative people often have an outlandish way of dressing, but it's also true that people who dress outlandishly get stuck with the arts. What I'm really interested in is the idea that you reveal something of yourself by putting layers on rather than taking layers away. So you act out an aspect of your personality or your sexuality through the clothes that you wear. So I first met Holly many years ago when I was a student, and he has an exhibition of his paintings that are also in the exhibition currently in a gallery in Liverpool. Oh gosh, it must be 20 years ago, if not more. He's always been a really great supporter of other artists and queer artists, and obviously you know, our interests overlap because his aesthetic, particularly in the early days of Frankie, was informed by a lot of this stuff. Um, and that, I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but my interpretation is that a lot of his appropriation of leather culture was also born out of that punk thing, and that it was shocking, and that a mainstream audience weren't used to seeing harnesses and chains and whips and all that kind of stuff, and they knew that they part of their appeal was that they created this idea of notoriety. And the Holly piece specifically, he had a very clear idea of what the main image would be, because, as you know, there's a main image, and then behind that is other imagery and information and so forth. So he had a very, you know, I had one idea, and his was very different. But I think he made the right choice. I can see now why he chose that one. It was a picture of himself from when he was about 18, and he really liked it, and he was wearing the Muir cap. That was what he wanted to go with. So that decision was made. But then I got to choose everything that went in the background, and he helped me find imagery, and he provided me with some stuff. So he gave me a scanned in copy of the original image, and I make a drawing from that, and then I make go to the printer and make a huge stencil to enlarge it. So the process, you start off by building up layers, and on a piece that size, there's probably 3 or 4 different layers of collage, and then the main image goes on top of that, and then the embellishment, so the glitter and the sequins. And on that piece, so the cap and things like that are made with real leather as well. So that's all cut out again, all by hand. Every sequin stuck on individually. You know, I've experimented with a lot of stuff over the years, and you can buy them on a string and things like that, but it just looks rubbish. It just doesn't work. So although it's more labour intensive, it's much better to do them individually. You get a much better effect, I think. Someone like Lily Savage is incredible. You know, Paul O'Grady and Lily Savage, and the character created, was so accepted and part of mainstream culture. He was on like primetime television, and his original act couldn't be less suitable, you know, for primetime television. When he was in the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, every other word was an expletive, but he was sort of absorbed into that. And people I know in America just can't believe that it wouldn't happen. And although there's lots of representation now on TV about drag and about drag culture and performance, it's not in the same way as it was when when she was presenting things like Blankety Blank, and, you know, Saturday night prime time family viewing, to have a man in a dress, you know. It's quite remarkable, and it's easy to take that for granted, I think. And so it's always nice to make reference to those people that have gone before us. I've been pretty lucky, really. I mean, obviously anyone putting stuff out into the world will get a certain amount of negative you know, comments, and I've certainly been trolled quite a lot over the years, but I've got quite a thick skin, so I'm not really bothered. It's funny, I was talking to someone the other day, a young artist who's just starting out, and they were asking me about what advice. I mean, I don't know if I'm the right person to talk to, but I said, what you have to bear in mind, that as an artist, there'll be 1% of people in the world that really love what you do. There'll be 1% that really hate what you do, and the remaining percentage won't even know you exist. And you just need to find that 1% and concentrate on them that really like what you do. You're never going to please everybody, are you? Nor should you try.